So with all of that said, I reckon we should go back to Brisbane, Jeff, to start our chat today, and the response to all of that, which, when there's a close result or when Australia lose at home, there's always a little bit of a blow up. But I was a little bit surprised about the criticism of Cummins, and I suppose the framework of the week around Australia Day and so on was that he was going to be a lightning rod if they happened to lose this test match. But his comments around believing it was a great thing for world cricket that the Windies had found a way to win and so on, I just thought that was quite gracious and in context and so on. But it was met with a fair bit of resistance from not just the usual suspects either, but from credible people who said that they didn't like or appreciate that Cummins was speaking that way, effectively saying you should have been hurting more. But I don't know, to my way of thinking, there's not an awful lot you can do about it once the game's over, and doing that post-match press conference with the bigger picture in mind felt pretty reasonable to me.
Well, I think there's a couple of things I've noticed from observing Pat Cummins in victory and defeat the last few years, and it's that he doesn't imbue a huge amount of emotion into it either way. He didn't come out after the World Cup final and say, "Oh my God, that's the biggest moment in my life and what an incredible thing." He said things like, "Oh, it's very satisfying to come away with a win." He's very understated with stuff like that. And similarly, when they lose, he doesn't go out and do the chest thumping like, "Oh, we're all in agony and we're gutted" is the favourite word they like to use in England. We're all shredded and in pieces in the dressing room because we lost a test match. He tries to be pretty level about it and say, "Yep, okay, it's disappointing, and here are the things that we haven't done well, and here's what we're going to try to do better, and we'll tackle the next game." So he doesn't blow it out of proportion one way or the other. And so it wasn't a major part of what he said after the game. He said, basically that they wanted to win and they did their best to win, and that as a Test cricket fan, he could see that it was a good thing for the game to have results that you don't expect. So it was a pretty mild sort of line, which, as lines tend to do that have anything in them that's out of the usual, they get blown up and put into headlines on the back of the paper, and then people go from there.
They were pretty big before the summer started, Jeff, about winning all five and advancing their position in the World Test Championship table, which is done on sort of match ratio percentage now, not raw points. And I mean, they've achieved that. Even with 4 wins and 1 loss, they're up to 60%. There are 3 teams on 50%, I think, in equal second. So that objective's been met, that they're in a good position as they go to New Zealand and try and qualify first or second for that again. A bit different for the Windies, though. I mean, they're down in 7th or 8th and they won't make that final. But in a way, it's sad that they have 3 high-profile test matches in England. That's fantastic. They're in July. But after that, you have to wait till November when they play twice at home against Bangladesh, and then January for 2 tests away against Pakistan. And, that's their lot in this whole World Test Championship cycle. We said similar things when Pakistan were in Australia last month, that after this centre point or focal point, and this was only 2 test matches as well, by the way, which goes to our wider ongoing frustration at 2 test series and not having the decider. But yeah, there's so much goodwill. It's a shame that even accounting for the England series, which will draw a lot of eyeballs, that they're not playing an awful lot between now and the end of the World Test Championship cycle.
And imagine how spicy it might have been if they had been playing a 3rd test, if after this absolutely epochal performance, there'd been a 3rd game to come. I mean, there would have been so much interest leading into it. It was really heartening to see how much interest there was in the result on Sunday, that, people who weren't quite paying attention were suddenly fixated on what was happening in that game. And it was a huge story, which a normal Australian win wouldn't have been. If they'd run down that total 3 wickets down, as they've done in most of the games that they've played against West Indies. I mean, I was looking at the numbers on this today. This century, since 2000, West Indies and Australia have played. Before Brisbane, they'd played 29 times. West Indies had won once out of 29 test matches this century. I mean, it's an extraordinary disproportionality in the records between these teams, and this current side, particularly in terms of the batting, is probably the weakest they've ever turned out. The least qualified, certainly the least experienced. All of those sides that got roundly beaten across various series still had some pretty credible players in them at different times, whereas this batting lineup has very little aside from Craig Brathwaite, who's been around forever and a day. So, the fact that they were able to cobble together enough runs in the third innings to give themselves something to bowl at and then to produce that performance, the high of this might have been too much for them to come back and do something similar in a third test match had there been one, but who knows?
Nice piece from Mike Atherton in the Times last night about the England press pack and all the journos in the press box at Hyderabad, despite how tense that game was, huddled around a computer screen watching the end of the test at Brisbane. And what's that old news expression? Like, man bites dog isn't a story. Dog bites man isn't a story. Man bites dog is a story. And this was a sort of a man bites dog moment, if you will, as far as the novelty factor. Because you're right, Australia run that down 3 or 4 or even 7 down. It's interesting. The Windies have done commendably, but there's no outpouring of emotion, which we saw so magnificently across the various broadcasts and with the playing side. And hearing from Shamar Joseph as well in the post-match interview saying that he'll always prioritise Test cricket now above the money that's likely to come his way through T20 cricket. We'll see whether that's possible in practice. I wouldn't blame him if he went to make more money in T20 leagues due to the economics of global cricket. But I love that his starting point is I want to keep representing the West Indies in this traditional format of the game. He did pull out of the IL T20 overnight. He had a deal there, but due to the broken toe, he can't do that. He has picked up a deal in the PSL, but none of that will compromise his ability to play for the West Indies because, as I mentioned before, their next engagement in the Whites is not until July. Yeah,
that's the thing is that in some ways that's an easier commitment to make in his position because of the unfortunate fact that they do play so little Test cricket, and if they were playing a lot more Test cricket, he'd be on a bigger contract and so on, and it would be more possible. So it can work out pretty well. But yeah, he's already had the first taste of being cost financially because the injury he picks up in a Test match is what keeps him out of the UAE League, where he would have cashed a pretty good check, even though presumably they signed him up before his Test heroics. And so I think he'd be attracting a fairly substantially higher price post ILT 20. Maybe his toe will be feeling better in a week or so and he can sign a new contract, revised contract.
He's just genuinely quick, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
Right? And fast bowlers command so much money in the T20 market. Another fast bowler from yesteryear somehow got shoehorned into the discourse, if you like, Rodney Hogg, which I just thought was the funniest plot twist in all of that of all the people Craig Brathwaite could have cited as having written off the Windies. I know Hogg was fairly strident in what he was saying about the side.
Of course he was.
Because that's just the way he's hardwired. But Rod Hogg, who is let's not do a character assassination there. But I found that pretty funny. There was also a bloke on Twitter who was getting stuck into you, Jeff, saying, "Eat every one of your words. Eat all of your words." That you were observing that the West Indies are a country that plays international cricket but doesn't have the financial heft of others. You're in disgrace, Jeff, because the Windies won at Brisbane.
Yeah, apparently citing structural disadvantage and explaining how that works is all of that vanishes when they win a Test match. It's now all gone away. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting to hear Rodney Hogg being the name coming out of Craig Brathwaite's mouth either. I mean, up there in the top tier of renter quotes in Australian media has to get stuck into anybody at any time in order to get a few extracts in the papers. But it did surprise me. I was like, that's who you've been paying attention to? Like, that's what's really riled you up? Imagine, I don't know. There were other more prominent people who I thought you might have been a little bit more stung by than what was coming from that direction.
It was a big double take for me as well. So over in India, we heard from Cam and Vish, who did their wrap-up podcast yesterday for us about, Jadeja and KL Rahul both missing for the Vizag Test match, picking up injuries on the final day. So it's a thigh injury for Jadeja. I think it was a knee for KL Rahul. They've dropped to 5th on the World Test Championship table, by the way, Jeff, which they'll need to sort of clean it up. And in the same way that Australia needed to boss this home summer, for India, if this becomes a real push-pull, and look, it has the potential. This could be like the Ashes was last year. This could be a thrilling series. They seem to follow this England side. I rattled through all of the really close Test matches that England have played in over the last 14 months. You wouldn't doubt there'll be a couple more with the way this team are hardwired. But yeah, India do need to keep winning to make sure, at home that is, to make sure they stay towards the top of that table and get to play in the final again. So that's not for nothing. But as for England, that Stokes stat does really stand out. That out of the 19 Test matches he's been captain for full time, they've won 14. 14 out of 19. You go through other England captains that are noteworthy. W.G. Grace, 8 of 13. Johnny won't hit today, 8 of 18. Percy Chapman from 28-29, 9 of 17. Jardine, 9 of 15. Peter May, 20 of 41. Ray Illingworth, so May and Illingworth both winning in Australia, 12 of 31. Brearley, 18 of 31. Gower and Gooch in a tough time for England cricket. Then through the 90s, Atherton, 13 of 54. Nasser, 17 of 45, and how much great work he did getting that side back on their feet again. Michael Vaughan, who has the most wins as England captain before Joe Root, 26 of 51. Strauss, 24 of 50. Cook, 24 of 59, and Root, 27 of 64. So the win percentage is through the roof, but even the quantum is right up there as well. It has fundamentally changed everything, Bazball. I mean, you occasionally see online criticism saying, well, other sides have played aggressively before. There is a precedent for other sides playing aggressive cricket, and therefore this is not new. This is new. And Ben Jones did some analysis yesterday on this about the percentage of aggressive or attacking shots that England played at Hyderabad. It was 56% of the balls they faced in this test match were played in an aggressive manner. That is by an absolute mile the most this century, or the data they keep back to 2006, for test matches in India. All of the different analysis that was done on the first 12 months of the Stokes-McCullum regime as well. This is different, and that's okay. Like the fact that they're doing something differently and it's working for them, that's great. I don't know why that's such a problem for some people.
Look, I think what they're doing is great. I think the thing that pisses people off is how much they pat themselves on the back for it, and how self-referential it is, and the whole "we're saving Test cricket" narrative is so cringeworthy in just how overinflated the sense of self-importance is. There was a fucking great Test match played at Brisbane, and it didn't involve anybody saying that they were going to save Test cricket by doing things differently. And it just involved people playing really good Test cricket. You can do that too. You can play great Test matches in whatever way you want to do it. You can do things completely differently. You can play like Usman Khawaja did in that first innings at Brisbane when Australia were falling apart and he kept them in the game. You can play like Shamar Joseph did. I mean, he was going at nearly 6 and over through his spell and picking up wickets. But that wasn't given a moniker of being a new and different way of playing cricket. It's just what happened in that innings. So that's the part that gets up people's noses, I think, and I understand why that is. The thing that's going to save Test cricket, if you want to talk about saving it, is the richest countries taking a more proactive approach to helping spread the wealth and keep things working across the board. It's not going to come down to whether England did or did not play an entertaining match or not.
Of course, that is true about the structural imbalances. But I do think it's sniffy, this idea that, because England are trying to do something differently and trying to make the game very watchable and turn themselves into a side that is just utterly compelling. And they are. Everyone's talking about them and focusing on them. That is, by virtue of its existence, a good thing. And, there's this idea that the self-referential point you make there, the idea that they've somehow bestowed this tag upon themselves, and therefore, I mean, that's not true either. That is a media confection, and a good one, right? That's what we're paid to do a lot of the time, is to generate interest in the game that we're watching. That's probably more of a fact in England than Australia, to be fair, where in England there is a sense that you're trying to fight for column inches more than might be the case in Australia, where it's a more culturally a bigger part of the conversation minute to minute, similarly in India. But still, like, this has captured the imagination, and that is like good. I saw yesterday a well-intentioned but thoroughly inaccurate post saying that, well, actually Matthew Mott started doing Bazball before they did, that it was Matthew Mott and Meg Lanning. I'm like, well, okay, I get that the Australian women's side have played an aggressive brand of cricket as well, but that's in short form cricket, which England were doing as well, concurrent to that in the lead up to the 2019 World Cup. Sides playing aggressively and with freedom in white ball cricket is a relatively normal thing. What's happening in Test cricket with this side is a very unusual thing, an extremely unusual thing that's borne out by the stats. And I don't think that it should be that it's a pinata to whack it at. We spoke about it on the Daily Show the other day with Cam. It's that every day they have a bad day. It's like, Bazball is dead. This is all a confected lie, and so on. Well, the results speak for themselves. It is fascinating, and I don't think it should be. Now, it's like there's this weird enjoyment being taken in this when it doesn't work. Well, when it does work, I don't think it means we need to. It's not about Australia, right? Like, we're often critical of Indian fans making everything about India. This is actually not about Australia, and I think we could take a backseat on this one.
Sure. I mean, the Matthew Mott thing is nonsense. Matthew Mott and Meg Lanning masterminded one of the dullest killings of a test match that we've ever seen in 2019 at Taunton, where they had absolutely no inclination to even try to give themselves a path to victory in just dully blocking out a draw there. So, no, that's not true. But it's not a confection that Ben Stokes did pull out the saving Test cricket line. Those are his words. That wasn't something that anybody put into his
McCullum
mouth.
as well. McCullum as well. I don't want to. I'm not challenging that. They've said they want to play in a way that will help re-energise Test cricket, and like they are, Shamar Joseph did as well. It's not an either or. Both things did do amazing. They generated amazing attention, but the England side's doing it like on a weekly basis. Like every test they play in is box office, must see TV right now, and that's like good for the game.
Sure.
The fact that it's England's neither here nor there.
Yes, the doing of it is one thing. The talking about it is another thing, I reckon. And something like the doing of it is what played out with, I mean, the Tom Hartley thing's incredible. The way that he gets picked out of nowhere, comes in, gets belted around, gets absolutely murdered in his first 4 overs, and then ends up being the match winner. And that, surely a lot of that has to come down to the captaincy. That if you had a different captain of that team, if almost anybody else in history is captaining that side after 4 overs, Tom Hartley's probably not winning that test match, but he's probably not getting another bowl in the game. But it's the way that he was treated, the way that he was looked after from that point, that allowed him to get back into the game and allowed him to ultimately decide it. So those are the good news stories. But they're just not the ones that have to be talked up beforehand.
I don't know who it was. It might have been Neil Manthorpe who wrote that the captaincy of Hartley was just the best that he's seen, as far as Stokes enabling him to do what he needed to do in that game for England. And there was a nice story that Tim Wigmore had in the Telegraph today about Hartley's family running a garden centre and Tom working in there part-time, as he's playing cricket for Lancashire, and his dad saying, I don't think he'll be dealing with the hanging baskets anymore. He's got this whole story ahead of him now. So, and that's a big part of the Stokes success. And Stokes has been a divisive character, and we've written and talked about a lot with him, but his record as Test captain, it's a staggering one. Also, the talent ID thing. Tom Brown, who we've had on the show last year from the South Asian Cricket Academy, was tweeting about this, that they've picked Hartley because they see a profile of a cricketer who they think will work in that situation. So, like, almost divorcing that from your results in first-class cricket. Like, they've got this process that they go through, and it's a triumph for that as well. It doesn't always work, but they've identified someone as a left-arm spinner, tick, tall, tick, bowls into the pitch, tick. And they're like, well, those 3 things combined in India, I suppose using the Akshar Patel model, is what they wanted and what they've got. And it's a point of difference. And, it's a thrilling thing for I guess, the development for him through Lancs and through his club, that they've now got a guy who's taken a 7 for on Test debut. It's barely believable. And
they've got Ollie Pope with one of those innings attached to him now that will follow him around for the rest of his career. To be able to turn that game around in the 3rd innings, to make 196, to get bowled for 196, trying to play a reverse scoop shot. All of it plays in together. All of it fits the overall story. And it was pleasing. He was someone who I thought might have a big Ashes series. He's got so much talent, and then he ends up getting injured and missing most of that series in the end, and looked pretty ropey before he did do his shoulder as well. But this will be the top of the mountain for him probably for the rest of his life.
It's like that nerd pledge thing, right? Like, we have certain players with numbers when we do our story time shows that are just linked forever. Like Ollie Pope 196, owing to the circumstances of the comeback and so on. That'll live on. That'll continue to live on. The only other annoyance in terms of the follow up, I reckon, is that we're back into moral Ashes space somehow, on the basis of the Ben Foakes stumping that wasn't of Jasprit Bumrah at the end. Like, as I put on Twitter yesterday, that was a really fun thing about last year's Ashes. It was like this piss take that we were all in on, whether you were following Australia or England, or you didn't have a dog in the fight. Everyone understood that was just a funny, absurd, preposterous thing. And now, 8 or 9 months later, people very earnestly talking about the moral victory of that test would have been India. And like, come on, for fuck's sake, this was shitposting, which has got way out of hand. And I saw a ridiculous piece in on one of the clickbait websites yesterday, which annoyingly quoted one of my tweets because I'm like, no, misunderstanding what I'm saying. The reason I'm tweeting about it having potentially been a spirit of cricket meltdown is again shitposting because it would have been funny. Had nothing to do with the absurdity of the Bear Stoke Carey incident that people cannot just let go.
Yes. Shitposting should not be allowed out into the real world. It is to stay on the websites. That's the only place it's supposed to be. The Australian Test team, well, I say the Test team have a bit of a break. There aren't that many players having a break, but they'll go to New Zealand at the end of February, base and reserve. They've sold out the first 4 days, which is interesting. So we'll be looking forward to get over there. And in the meantime, we've got T20s and one-dayers with some of the Test players involved with that West Indies series.
Yeah, I think this is great news for New Zealand cricket that they've been able to. It goes to how infrequently Australia visit for Test matches. There's a scarcity thing, but first 4 days sold out of a Test match is a big deal. So, we'll be making daily programs there and at Hagley Oval as well. The 2 Test matches starting, I think it's the 29th of February. So, about a month between Test engagements for Australia. So, the T20s, the squad was named. Captaining of that is Mitchell Marsh, of course, because he's been doing the job mostly of late. A lot of attention on Glenn Maxwell being there, having been sort of awkwardly rested from the one day as the story was breaking about what happened with him on the piss a few days before. And I know you and Brad have already talked about that, so we're not going to go back over that now. But the fact that Maxwell was there, I think, was just important to draw a line under that. And the one-day squad's interesting. They should be changing things up. I know there's a Champions Trophy next year, but are Australia really thinking about the Champions Trophy when constructing their one-day team right now? They're thinking about their World Cup.
Is anyone?
Defense. Yeah, and look, maybe we will closer to it. But it's really about getting a side ready for the tournament 3.5 years from now. So, Xavier Butler getting his first crack. Fraser McGurk getting his first crack as well. Steve Smith leading the side. Will he be there in 4 years? Probably not. So that's a bit of a quirk or a bit of a wrinkle in what I was saying before. But Nat Short, who's, captain of the BBL team of the year, he's in that side. Aaron Hardy's in that side. Lance Morris will play his first games for Australia. Nathan Ellis, who's a very classy death bowler, gets an opportunity in the absence of the big three who are all resting. So that one-day series begins at Melbourne on Friday, moves to Sydney on Sunday and Canberra on Tuesday, followed by the 3 T20. So they'll be off Broadway. No one will attend them. They won't do well through the gates. But, if for those who are interested in seeing how Australia start to regroup after the World Cup, this will be the first chance for that.
And Marcus Stoinis, who is in the T20 side but not in the one-day side, which you would guess that implies that they're moving on from him permanently, although nothing's been said in that regard. Although that kind of cricket, there's always a chance you can find your way back in.
He was pretty good on this, Stoinis. He's like, may not play one-day cricket again. He kind of knows because he's savvy enough to realise that these things tend to work in 4-year cycles, and he didn't have a great World Cup. Got left out of that side at the end, didn't play in the final. So he's not in the starting 11, not in the squad now. He's just re-signed with the Stars on a long-term deal. So there's no suggestion that he'll retire. But, it feels increasingly like Stoinis' career will be more as a specialist T20 player. And I don't know, he's 35, I think, from memory. He's a bit older than we think, because he arrived a bit later than the average Bear. So we wish him well.
All right. Before we get to the break, let's play a little bit of Nerd Pledge, the game that we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program by sending in contributions. Those contributions come in very specific denominations of whatever currency they choose, because the number relates to cricket in some way, and we have to figure out what the number means. Today's Nerd Pledger is Joshua Timmins, first-time caller. £2.76. It's a British pledge, so the number is 276. The decimal point can go anywhere, and it comes with a clue.
Yes, and Josh Timmins is running the Edinburgh Half Marathon, I should say.
Is he?
By the way, it might be the 10K. Okay. He's running the 10K with his partner. So they've signed up in the last week, and they've been training, doing their park runs and that kind of thing. So great to have you with us here as well, Josh. The clue is this third choicer turned his hand to the law, a player I have a strange obsession with. Jeff.
Third choicer, law. First thought here was Zafar Ansari. and I think this works out. So Zafar Ansari played 3 tests for England in 2016, 15 and 16, thereabouts.
16, 17, yeah.
16, 17. I think they were all in 2016. I reckon he was done by the time 2017 came around, maybe. Anyway, point is this. Came through the Surrey system after playing at Cambridge, where he did study law. Left-arm orthodox bowler, more of a batter, really, particularly at university level and first-class level. But he worked on his other string at university so much that he started getting picked in the county 19s and so on the basis of being an all-rounder rather than just being a batter. Doesn't end up with like world-beating career numbers. He's got a first-class batting average of 29 and bowling of 35, so in the sort of useful category rather than the world-beating category in both departments. But there was a lot of potential, and England were very interested in him. He just wasn't completely interested in cricket. He liked playing cricket, but he also liked doing other stuff as well. The description of him as a third choicer, I would say, is because late 2015, he gets picked in a UAE squad, or the squad to go to the UAE to play Pakistan, behind Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid, who will be the 2 main spinners. He's picked as the third, who may or may not play. But he breaks his thumb while he's fielding in a county game and can't make the tour, and he gets replaced by Samit Patel. And then in 2016, he does get a test cap because he goes to Bangladesh. He's now the 4th choicer, so he's behind Moeen, Adil Rashid, and Gareth Batty, who was his captain at Surrey. And Gareth Batty, who played so little Test cricket and probably could have played a fair bit more, who was a very decent player, but played for such a long period of time and got that late hurrah, right, Adam? Like he gets picked on that Test tour very, very late in his career.
Yeah, so 12 years after he made his Test debut against Lara at Antigua as part of the 400 not out. So he was, playing all the way back then. And after an excellent 2016 campaign for Surrey, I remember he won a game down at Hampshire at the last minute, and they decided to give him another crack as, the senior pro on that trip. And yeah, I think it's a nice thing that he rounded out his long and interesting career with a second crack at Test cricket. And yeah, Zafar on the way through. There's an interesting story about Zafar on that trip. Daniel Norcross tells that he's never seen a cricketer sitting in the lobby of a hotel reading the Times literary supplement, which kind of sums up Zaf as a personality.
So the Test that Gareth Batty plays, Zafar doesn't play the first Test, and England win it narrowly by 22 runs. And Gareth Batty bowls decently, takes a few, but they want to give Zafar Ansari a taste of Test cricket, so they leave out Batty for the second Test, and they play Zafar Ansari, and they lose that one to Bangladesh quite heavily. You remember that? I remember watching that series at the time. Alistair Cook was captaining, and they just got home in the first Test, and then lost the second one by 100 plus runs.
It was brilliant. They got bowled out in one session. They lost all 10 wickets. It was I said before that England are an incredibly watchable team at the moment, and we should not get too sniffy about that. Well, they were watchable then for a different reason. They had this habit of losing all 10 in one session. It happened 5 times in 3 years. So yeah, but this was the start of the sequence, I think.
Yeah, well, he was part of that. He barely bowled in the first innings when they were out, when Bangladesh were out pretty cheaply. He gets Tamim, Iqbal and Mahmudullah in the second innings, a couple of decent wickets there, and then England collapse batting last. They're chasing 273. Zafar makes a duck. And then November 2016, just shortly afterwards, on to India. He plays the first 2 Tests at Rajkot and Visakhapatnam. They draw the first one of those. He gets a couple of wickets, but can't really contribute to bowling out India. On the last day, he gets Ashwin out, but doesn't take another wicket as they're trying to bowl out India, who hang on for a draw. And then the second Test, he makes 4-0 with the bat, takes none for in the first innings and doesn't bowl in the second. Another England collapse batting last, and they lose heavily. So he's left out after that. But I think the idea is there that he might play more. And then a few months later, sort of at the very start of the 2017 English season, he says, I'm done. I'm going to go and practice law at the age of 25 and not bother with this cricket caper anymore. So 3 Test caps to his name, a good chunk of county cricket and first-class cricket as well, but just decided it wasn't for him. The number was 276 because that was his Test best bowling. He also took a 2 for 77. But yeah, the stories, I was chatting to Steve Finn about him during the World Cup as well, and he said similar things of Zafar sitting there in the dressing room reading, reading books about philosophy or whatever it was, and then other players being like, Oh, what are you reading? Oh, what are you reading for? And everyone else is playing golf on their PlayStations or whatever, and on the Xbox. And uh, no, nobody else. Let's just say there weren't a lot of shared interests between him and the rest of them. The way they chose to structure their lives at the time.
And he has stayed peripherally involved in the game. He was I think he was the primary author of the ICEC report last year, which had such a big effect on the national cricket conversation over here. So he's not completely removed from it. I think he's got some formal title at Surrey as well. But yeah, it's a bit of an oldie worldy story, isn't it? Where he played a bit of international cricket and thought it wasn't for him. Like we when making story time here of players like that occasionally who put their professional interests first. And yeah, that was the case for Zaf, who's a fascinating guy. I think he did something else at uni as well. I feel like he did like chemical engineering or something as well. He had like an extraordinary double degree. But yeah, mega brain and short career, but an interesting one.
That is Nerd Pledge. If you want to play Nerd Pledge, go to patreon.com/the final word. You can join up with all the people who are supporting the show and become part of our very nice community of people there. And you'll hear about them when we talk about the game we played in Sydney after the break.